Good afternoon. I'm Mayor Tom Barrett, and I'm joined this afternoon by Police Chief Edward Flynn. I am also joined by Mary Kay Belchunas, who is a mother of a young man who was serving our community and who was killed in the line of duty. And I'm also joined by Pamela Collins, who works for Project Ujima, who lost a daughter to gun violence as well. I've spoken before about the tragedy that occurred in Brookfield last year where at Azana Salon, Zena Daniel and two of her co-workers were killed when Radcliffe Houghton, her estranged husband, was able to obtain a gun that he purchased off armslist.com and used that gun in defiance of a domestic violence restraining order to kill his wife and her two co-workers. Sadly, earlier this week, we saw yet another incident of domestic violence where a woman was killed by a man who legally could not possess a gun. In this case, the murder took place on Milwaukee's South Side, where Anne Marie Batch was killed by Daniel Billings, a man with whom she had a relationship, a man who was a convicted felon, a man who could not legally possess a firearm. While we wait to hear the details of how he got the gun, we do not have to wait to say enough is enough. Today, the United States Senate has announced a deal that will expand background checks to all commercial sales, including sales online and at gun shows. Importantly, this legislation that has been introduced in the Senate would have covered the situation that occurred at Azana Salon. And that is very, very important to me, that it's important to this community, and I think it's important to the people in America. So I stand before you today encouraged but cautious. The bipartisan proposal for background checks was announced by Republican Pat Toomey of Pennsylvania and Democratic Senator Joe Manchin of West Virginia. The proposal requires background checks for gun sales in commercial settings, including gun shows and online gun sales. And those are very, very, very important. Not having background checks at gun shows, not having background checks at online sales, I believe has been a key missing ingredient to how we reduce violence in this country. This progress is a direct result of the American people demanding action. Nationally and locally, a majority of Americans support background checks. In fact, an overwhelming majority of Americans support background checks. Gun owners, non-gun owners, Democrats, Republicans, independents support background checks. People in urban areas, people in rural areas support background checks. And now we have the first opportunity in a generation for the United States Senate to act on this provision. Just 2 weeks ago, a Marquette University poll found that more than 80% of people in Wisconsin, including gun owners, support background checks. So this is an important step, a first step in closing one of the largest, if not the largest, loophole that is putting lives at risk. I want to make one thing clear. This is not about infringing on anyone's Second Amendment rights. The people we are trying to keep from getting their hands on guns are the people who legally cannot possess guns. If you legally can possess a gun, this legislation will not in any way hinder you. It will, however, help law enforcement in making sure that guns stay out of the hands of people who are convicted felons, people who have domestic violence restraining orders, and people who have involuntary mental judgments, commitment judgments against them. It is an important step. It's one that I urge all members of Congress to support. Chief Flynn deals with this issue on a daily basis, and I'd like to have him make a few comments as well. Chief?
Thank you. Well, I'm going to start off by commending Senator Johnson for signing the petition that would oppose any legislation that would significantly restrict the rights of lawful gun owners to procure firearms. I've got great news for him. The bill before us, the Manchin-Toomey bill, doesn't do that. We are being presented, I think, with a remarkable compromise that does something essential. It ensures, or at least better ensures, that those who should not have firearms in their possession will not continue to have easy access to them. Now, it's an important and positive step towards reasonable, rational regulation of who possesses firearms. And we all know, anybody that ever took a civics class knows that every constitutional right is subject to reasonable regulation. Just 4 years ago, the Supreme Court said exactly that about the Second Amendment. Now, the Second Amendment is no different than any other amendment in this regard. The right to free speech doesn't include libel or yelling fire in a crowded theater. The right to practice one's religion doesn't allow someone to be burned at the stake. And the right to possess a firearm does not include extending that right to the dangerously mentally ill, to the substance abuser, or to the career criminal. Now, we already define who's allowed to possess firearms. The Brady Bill, passed in 1994, the 1968 Gun Control Act, both define those individuals who should not be in possession of a firearm. My police officers take 2,000 illegal guns off the streets of this city every year. More than 90% of my homicide suspects who use a firearm, more than 90% of my homicide suspects who committed a non-fatal shooting did it with a firearm they purchased on the secondary market. Of those 2,000 firearms we take off the streets every year, fewer than 10% have been reported stolen. Now, we have an obligation, and the obligation we have is to the potential victims of crime and to our police officers who encounter these firearms on the street. The International Association of Chiefs of Police, the Police Executive Research Forum, the Major City Chiefs Association, indeed, every single reputable national executive police organization supports extending background checks and closing the gun show loophole. Now, as the NRA constantly implores, we need to enforce the laws on the books. The law on the books about who can possess a firearm has been on the books for many years. Teeth were put in it in 1994, in the wake of the attempted assassination of President Reagan. But there was a loophole, and that loophole has been exploited to provide nearly 70% of the crime guns used in this country. We need to close that loophole. I'm asking the Senate to pick a side. And this time, I and all the other police chiefs in this country would be grateful if the side they picked was law enforcement's and not the criminals. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief. Again, we have, unfortunately, tragedy that occurs in our own community. And Mary Kay Belchunas is a mother who lost her son, something that no one wants to see happen. And she has bravely continued her fight to reduce violence in this community. And I'd like to ask her to say a few words. Mary Kay?
Thank you, Mayor. In February, I met with Senator Johnson in his Washington, D.C. office. He was very gracious, and he listened to my plea for common sense gun reform. When I asked him about his own position, he said to me, and I quote, "The gun issue is not my thing," end of quote. Well, I beg to differ. The gun issue may not be his passion or his area of expertise, but this gun issue, I believe, is every citizen's thing. It affects all of us because the trajectory of a bullet goes far beyond the initial piercing blow. It is a watershed moment after which nothing is ever the same, ever. We have all heard the statistics. Gun violence claims the lives of more Americans annually than in any other developed country. While gun violence is highly concentrated in the United States, our rates of gun violence are so high that even people who are at relatively low risk by American standards are considered at risk by international standards. God bless you. In the past few years, people deemed at low risk have been targeted in this country, including school children, university students, and those gathered in prayer. Each death leaves a long trail of grief and lives that are changed forever. There are solutions to this to reduce this menacing problem if all of us work together to find them. Senator Johnson, I say this to you. I have reached out to you 3 times since our February meeting and have received 1 form letter email in response. In that email, you thanked me for supporting the Second Amendment like you do. And I appreciate that because I do support the Second Amendment. I, in the past, have purchased a gun and have gone through a background check. And then you stated that you sponsored a bill that would have prohibited the Department of Justice from tracking and cataloging the purchases of multiple rifles and shotguns. Expanded background checks, Senator, are a very good beginning. An assault weapons ban, a ban on high-capacity magazines, and expanded mental health treatment are positive next steps. My son, Special Agent Jay Balchunas, was murdered with a gun obtained illegally while he was working to protect the citizens of Wisconsin. As my senator, are you saying that my son does not deserve a vote, let alone legislation to protect those that he worked to protect? And if your answer is yes, then I, his mother, your constituent, deserve an explanation. Thank you.
Thank you, Mary Kay. Next, I'd like to ask Pamela Collins, again, who works for Project Ujima and who lost her daughter, to say a few words. Pamela, if you would, please.
Hi, my name is Pamela Collins. I lost my daughter, Rosalind Ross, to gunfire. That's a feeling that never goes away. I was called this morning by Daryl. I don't work for Project Ujima. I go to their meetings. And it's an awesome group. They're just awesome. It's a group of us who've lost someone. And we get together on Saturdays, we break bread, and we speak about our losses. I think the senators need to come to that meeting and feel the people's pain and understand what they're going through, because this is something you never get over, never. You carry it with you every day, you wear it every day. And so I'm asking the senators to come to the meeting and listen to the people. It's way out of hand, and it's getting messy, and they need to clean it up. So I'm begging the senators to do your job. It don't take much. It's just a vote. Thank you.
There are certain watershed events that occur in life. There are certain watershed events that occur in politics. I truly believe that what happened today with the 2 senators is a watershed moment in American history. I believe that the senators of both parties, and this is a bipartisan compromise, that senators of both parties can unanimously support this compromise. The reason I believe that is because it does not infringe on Second Amendment rights. It does not create a federal database that the FBI would maintain. It allows family members to transfer guns to other family members. It allows friends to transfer guns to other friends. What it prohibits is the sales that have occurred at gun shows and online sales that have proliferated because of this loophole. This is a rare moment when the 2 parties in Washington have begun to come together. It is my hope, and I don't think I'm naive when I'm saying this, it is my hope that this bill could pass the United States Senate unanimously, because the people have spoken by overwhelming numbers. They have supported universal background checks. This certainly addresses the most egregious loopholes that occur right now. If there are any questions, we'd be happy to answer any questions.
Chief, question for the chief here. Given your understanding of how criminals in Milwaukee who use weapons get those weapons. You referenced the secondary market, but specifically how in that market they get those weapons. To what extent do you think this bill, if it passed, would have an impact on crime in Milwaukee?
It would certainly make it somewhat more difficult for criminals to secure firearms. Now, no single act of legislation, no single lever that is pulled is going to cure all our problems. Certainly, I've made proposals before, and the mayor has supported them and advanced them, that we make straw purchasing a felony here in this state, because more than a few of our criminals get their firearms through their girlfriends who can pass a background check. So no law is perfect, but what this does do is close a significant loophole, and that's the loophole of any use of the internet or any attempt to go to a gun show or a gun market that's not a federal licensed firearm dealer and get a firearm. And that's, our experience is, over 90% of the weapons we seize from criminals were purchased on the secondary market. This will put a dent in it. It will make it harder. That's our goal.
And you both referenced, or I know, Mayor, you referenced, but Chief, you may know, the Billings case. Do you know where he got that weapon?
We asked the ATF to expedite the gun trace, and they really moved heaven and earth to do it in less than 24 hours. The last record they have of it was being delivered to a now closed gun dealer in 1967. So all we know is the following. It's never been reported stolen, and presumably it's moved through the secondary market for the last 40-some years. That's all we can infer. There is no record of it.
Mayor, can Senator Johnson really stop the vote at this point? Aren't the numbers pretty much in your side's favor?
My understanding is it's 14 senators, I think 13 senators who have said that they will not allow, or they would vote against proceeding with a bill that they felt violated the Second Amendment. I honestly believe that even the letter that he and the other senators signed, that if you look at this language, this does not stop any of them from voting to allow it to proceed. That's why I say I honestly believe that you could get 100 senators, because this bill has been so carefully crafted and it so clearly does not infringe on any Second Amendment rights. And that was the number one criteria he set. Senator Toomey himself, again a Republican, said that he does not consider this a gun control measure. He considers this common sense legislation.